kind of give you a rundown of our week. It went by in a blur, like I was saying earlier, but Monday wasn't too bad. Just a normal Monday, just kind of grunting out work. But then Tuesday, I subbed. Kylie had a later day with her nanny, and then we had a national night out, which was awesome, but really did not have the time just to kind of rest. And then Wednesday was another really, really long day for both of us, just with working, and Kylie got home especially late, and Thursday, again, just another kind of late night, not really having a whole lot of time of rest, and so we were feeling it this week. Yesterday was really our only day just to really just take a breath and just relax and just have time with family, and that was great. We went to my hometown of Lawrence to enjoy Squealing on the Square. It's a huge barbecue fest we go to every year, but it was a lot of fun. But again, the need for worship, the need to come together, to sing, to read the Word, to hear the Word, it's so important. And with that said, we've kind of been talking through a couple things this past few weeks as Kylie kind of finished out what we called abundance. And the whole idea of that series was to kind of steward our entire lives, especially our resources, our energy, our time, all for the purpose of God's kingdom. And so kind of a follow-up to that is this idea of, well, what does worship really look like? What does it mean for us to worship God with every single aspect of who we are, every single day of our lives? And so kind of what we've talked about is this idea of to waste ourselves in worship. And so that's why we've called this series Wasted in Worship. And in this series, we're going to be looking at a couple different things just to kind of see if everyday practices that we can do and devote ourselves to, have a discipline, those sorts of things. But before we get to that, we kind of have to set a foundation for what worship is, what worship is not. And so what actually brings a spirit of worship in our lives. And so that's what I'm here to do this morning. But before we jump into the Word, I kind of want to have a little bit of fun this morning. Is that okay if we have a little fun? Is that okay? We allowed to have fun in church? Need some participation, so I just want to ask you guys, when you hear the word devoted, what are some things that you would say that you yourself are devoted to? So just call out some answers. What are you devoted to? Spouse. Good one. What else? Anything else? That's it? Kids, right? What about a team? Anybody? Clemson, USC, right? I mean, some people don't care, but I mean, that's okay. Some people are devoted to their favorite band. Some people are devoted to a skill or ability that they have. You know, we devote ourselves to all sorts of crazy things in life. But I love the way that just the Webster Dictionary defines devotion. It says that it's love, loyalty, and or enthusiasm for a person, activity, or cause. I love that. And so one of the goals I kind of want to have this morning is to redefine what it means for us to be devoted to God in a spirit of worship. And so, again, the first goal, the first aim of this sermon is to elevate the way we devote ourselves to God in worship. Because as much as we would love to say that I'm devoted to God, oftentimes life is not that simple, right? Like we can go through life, we can have all these great intentions of being devoted to something, to being devoted to God. But when life really starts to get real, it's a lot harder to actually stick to what we say and to stick to those devotions, those things that we intend to do with God. Oftentimes as well, church is a time where we expect to leave all our things that we are devoted to, like the teens, like our spouse and our kids, all the fun things in life, we're supposed to just leave them at the door. So kind of as a little bit of a participation for you this morning, I want you to turn to your neighbor, and I want you to give them the best scowl that you can. Just nice scowl. Well, I'm going to give you a scowl. All right? Like, we expect church to be this time where we just have to be very serious-faced. We have to be totally just sitting in silence sometimes and being very, very serious and quiet. And there are times for that. But oftentimes, worship doesn't have to just be stone-faced. Like, it doesn't have to be a time to scowl. It's a good thing that we're here. But when we're truly devoted to something, it doesn't matter how bad things look. I know that is not always something easy to hear, but if we're truly devoted to something, it doesn't matter how bad things look. We are devoted. And so, if we are truly devoted to God, we are going to stick to that no matter what. Because, again, if we're devoted to our favorite team, they may have the worst record in all of football. They may have the worst record during basketball season. But despite that, we're going to root for them, right? If you're devoted to being the best karaoke singer, you may have the worst pitch in the world. You may be the worst singer, but if you're devoted to that, you're going to stick to it. You're going to embarrass your friends, but that's okay, right? You may have the nicest lawn in the neighborhood. Some of you guys may take a lot of pride in your property, and that's good. But again, let's take it a little bit deeper. If we're devoted to status quo sometimes, because the possibility of change is just too much for us, it scares us. Sometimes we're devoted to our spouses simply because they make us feel good. Sometimes we devote ourselves to our kids because we want to project our lives, all the things that went unfulfilled in our lives onto them. We have these lofty goals for them. Sometimes devotion looks like being devoted to gossip because it just helps us numb the pain of sometimes what we feel inside. Again, devotion looks a lot different in every aspect of our lives. But if God really is to be the high point, to be the center point, if you will, of our life, devotion has to get really serious with Him. And so, for those of you that take notes, the first thing you might want to write down is that sometimes, if we're honest, sometimes we want things more than we want the King. That's kind of an opening thought. Sometimes we want things more than we want the King. So again, the first aim of the message this morning is to elevate the way we devote ourselves to God in worship. Because again, God is this immovable force. He's this all-knowing, all-powerful, all-present, forever eternal being. And He created every single one of us. He knows us, every single little quirk we have, as many hairs or as little hairs as we may have in our head sometimes. He knows every single one of those things. And He loves us, and He wants to know us. He doesn't want to just give us things like a good little Santa. Like, God's not Santa Claus, right? But God is our King. He wants to be our Lord. He wants to be the center point of our life. So sometimes when we want things more than we want the King, and we know that's wrong, we know that's not what God intends for us. So the second aim that I have for this morning is to redefine our purpose. If I were to ask you, what is your purpose? You could probably come up with all sorts of different answers. Whatever hat we may wear in our lives, we may think it's being a good spouse, we may think it's being a good parent, a good coworker, a good friend, a good father, a good mother, whatever. Our purpose defines everything that we do. And so, as a Christian, if we claim to be Christ followers, if we claim to have Him as the Lord of our lives, our purpose, believe it or not, is to waste ourselves for Him. That may sound a little bit like, whoa, what in the world? We're supposed to just waste ourselves away. But we are. We're supposed to worship Him. We're supposed to give of ourselves. And so, without purpose, without the purpose of worshiping God, life is truly a waste of time, a royal waste of time. For any of you that ever want to get depressed when reading the Bible, I'll just share a little bit with you. My devotions, I go through the Bible an entire year. But lately I've been going through Jeremiah. And as much fun as I love his writings, he's just a downer. That's the truth. He really is. He really, really is. And so I just finished up Jeremiah, expecting a great book to really pick me up. And I get into Lamentations next. And if those of you that read your Bible and know that book, that's not a really fun one either. And so I'm kind of grinding through my devotion this year, and it's been tough. But if you ever really, really want to get depressed when reading the Bible, I'd recommend Ecclesiastes. You can read it word for word. It says, everything's a waste of time, everything's pointless, everything's a waste. It's all for nothing. And if we don't acknowledge worshiping God as our ultimate purpose, it's all for nothing. But before we kind of go on and look more a little deeper into what the Word has to say about worship and what our role is, I want to just tell you a couple things that worship is not. Okay? And so worship is not just something you do on Sunday. I know we call this a worship service, and that might be the only time you actually go to a formal worship setting or a worship time in your week. But worship is not just showing up on a church building on Sunday morning. It's not just singing a song, right? Worship is about a heart posture turned toward God with open hands and saying, Lord, use me however way you see fit. And so worship happens when we put our hearts in a posture where we allow Him to pour into us. God's intention when He created mankind was to have complete communion with us. And that's true. We see this in Genesis 3, in the account of the fall, where Adam and Eve sinned. While it's an awful chapter, there's actually a really encouraging part in that verse, in verse 8 of chapter 3 of Genesis. It says, Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Now there's a little bit more to that verse, but just this first half I want to focus on. I want you to think about that. I mean, Adam and Eve are literally in this garden, and they hear the footsteps of God with them. Now, while it's not specifically referenced that God had made an appearance before that time, I'd like to assume, I think it's a safe assumption, God probably would have been visiting them before. He didn't just wait until they screwed things up to show up, right? That's not who God is. I would very, very confidently say that God was with them. He was regularly being a part of their lives, walking with them in the garden, making sure they're doing okay, making sure that their life is being fulfilled. And up to that point, it was. And so, again, I think God's intention is still very true for us today, that He wants to have communion with us. And oftentimes, we can look at our life circumstances. We can look at things that are bleak. We can look at things that really are not going our way, if we're just being honest, right? God still wants that. He wants those ugly parts of our lives. He wants to be the Lord of our life, but He also wants to be the friend in our life. I love how that part of that last song talks about He's a friend. He's a friend to us. So God does not want us to neglect ourselves either, though. As much as we may call this wasting worship, it doesn't mean that we are not important. It doesn't mean we don't have significance. But all the things that we have, all these passions, all the desires we have, they have to be put within the correct order. So Jesus says it this way in Matthew 6:33. He says, "But seek first God's kingdom and God's righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." So what does that translate to in real life? Those Clemson tickets, those USC tickets, all those things that you like to enjoy, that's good. They're wholesome things. They can really be fun. That's okay. But put God first. That's really all it means right there. Put God first, and then all those things that you want to do, all the things that you enjoy doing, go for it. All those things you mentioned being devoted to, your kids, your spouse. Maybe some of you it's food. I'm pretty devoted to food. I'm hard to pass up on food. But God's trying to get us to see that if we place ourselves in a place where we see Him for who He is first, we see Him as the Lord, as a creator, and also as a close friend, all those things are going to take care of themselves. If we seek His will, we seek His righteousness, all of those things will fall into place. And once they do, we finally start to see this clearer vision of what it means for our purpose to be. And again, if our purpose is to worship God, I think we'll see that come to fruition. As much as God wants communion with us, how many of you know that you are sinful people, right? Like, am I the only one in here? Like, we know, left to our own vices, time and time and time again, sin will creep up. Sin will corrupt our lives. It will destroy everything we've gained in our relationship with God. And so because of that, God in His knowledge and in His grace provided Jesus Christ, His Son, to come. We know that. And while that was good, Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice to atone for our sins. That wasn't where God wanted to stop there. And so He gave the Holy Spirit. And in the Spirit, we become more and more connected with each other. We can pray openly with one another. We can read the Word together. We can sing songs together. All because of the Spirit. Not because of something that we have to rely on a high priest to do. We don't have to go to someone and say, "Can you forgive my sins before God?" We don't have to ask permission if we can read the Bible. Like, we have direct access into who God is simply because of His Spirit working in our hearts. But when we're not aligned with the Spirit, life circumstances, all those things that just tear us down, all the things that threaten to destroy us and corrupt us, they'll cause us to abandon our faith. They'll cause us to be more devoted to how we feel than what the Lord is telling us to do, what we know to be the right thing. And so emotions, while they are important and they are real and they can be very, very good in the right context, emotions are not a part of worship. They can be, again, but the goal of worship is not just to have a peak in our emotions and say, "Yeah, I got my Jesus for the week, I'm good, let's go," right? That's not what worship is. Worship is about lowering ourselves and allowing God, who is the high priest, God to be the worship leader in our context, even this morning. I don't know if you felt it, but God was speaking to us. He was leading us this morning. Again, it had nothing to do with what we were singing, had nothing to do with the right key or wrong key, maybe if you were singing, like, again, some of you. But again, God's presence was here, and He was leading us through that. That's worship. But the temptation that always follows up with that, with this idea is that we compare ourselves to others, right? How many of you think it's pretty hard to compare? right? I think it's pretty easy. It's really easy. We look at that in the way that we sin. We look at that in the way that we may give of ourselves, may give our resources, our energy, our talents. Whatever it is, it's so easy for us to look at our neighbor and say, well, I'm not doing what they're doing, right? I'm in a much better position than they are. But this is not a series. This is not a Sunday to point what's wrong in others. This is not a sermon we need to tell them they need to step up. I mean, there's a time for that. But this morning, I want us to all just take a real close second just to look at ourselves, to kind of reset where we're at, and just objectively say, am I really in a place where I feel like I'm devoted to God? Am I allowing His purposes to guide my decision-making, all my life choices? And so this Sunday is a time to check ourselves. This is a gauge. It's where you get your thermometer in your mouth, you make sure, I'm really in a place of worship with God every single day. And so we don't all need to be aware about each other, but we do need to be self-aware. And so if you're taking notes, the second point here is that God can never move you from a place you don't acknowledge that you're at. God can never move you from a place that you don't acknowledge that you're at. And I know that kind of hurts. That can kind of sting a little bit, depending on where you're at today. But the truth is, God's not looking at us to see what's wrong in our neighbor. He's looking at us and asking, listen, Dillon, are you worshiping me with all who you are? Are you worshiping me in the way that I intend for you to worship me? Are you giving of yourself? Are you wasting yourself away for my purposes, for my good? And the same is true for you. Again, we have to ask ourselves, are we giving ourselves to God and His purpose? A dangerous thing can happen when we get comfortable with the status quo, especially in our walk with the Lord. We can be going along, things are looking fairly up and to the right, but lo and behold, life is going to throw something at you, and it's going to derail you. And it's going to either cause you to run away from God, or the other choice is to embrace it, to lean in, and choose to say, you know what? As much as life may not be fair right now, as much as life may be wanting just to destroy me from the inside out, I'm going to hold true. I'm going to hold true because I know that that's what God intends for me. I know that God has better things for me. And so it means we have to intentionally connect to God. See, His love has no conditions. His grace has no limits. His glory cannot be described, right? His power has no limits. The truth is, we can lose our connection to God. We have free will. We are not trapped in this relationship with God. We can choose to walk away. But God will never lose His connection to us. He'll never walk away. He's never going to give up. As long as we have breath in our lungs, God's always going to be trying to reach out to us. One of our professors at Southern Wesleyan always described grace as this. He said it's the unmerited favor of God. And because God is so full of grace, and because He Himself is love, He will never stop reaching to us to love Him back. That's who God is. But with that said, as far as connectivity and this imagery and this metaphor here, I have a little bit more participation for you. If you have your phone with you, can you just grab it out of your pocket right now? Smartphone, dumb phone, doesn't matter. Just grab your phone. I want you to take a second and look at it, okay? I want you to say that your phone, phone, speak. All right? Because as much as you may think this is just a stupid piece of technology that you don't want to carry with you all the time, your phone is an amazing metaphor for us to learn from today. See, we may not realize this, but our phone is just like us. It is. It was made with a specific purpose, to call people. It was made with the purpose of connecting us to each other, connecting us to our neighbors and family that are thousands of miles away sometimes. Our phone, as much as we may hate it sometimes, is always going off, right? I mean, we get notifications at 4 in the morning that we always love, right? Not my favorite thing. But again, our phone lets us know what's going on when people are trying to connect with us. Our phone is important. But even if it's a smartphone or a dumb phone, if it has games or not, music or not, camera or not, unlimited data or not, whatever it be, our phone has a purpose and it allows us to connect with each other like we never have before. I want to share just a little bit of an interesting tidbit for you. I kind of geek out on this stuff, so you have to forgive me for this part. But I love the movie Hidden Figures. Anybody ever seen that? I love that movie. when they are going into this new facility where they're trying to build the new IBM computer, I love the calculations that they had. The IBM 7090, again, was going to take up the entire room that they were in. It's going to replace, I think, upward of a dozen people that have been dedicated to working on mathematical equations with NASA. But the thing that's so amazing was this computer, while it was going to be huge and require a bunch of money, it could do 24,000 equations a second. Like, as soon as it does that, 24,000 gone, right? So that was amazing. But this is an iPhone 6. This is Kyler's phone. The amazing part of this is that as much as the IBM 7090 could do 24,000 equations, it's going to do 3.36 billion instructions a second. So literally, what that translates to is this phone could do 32,600 times faster than IBM. Another way of thinking about it is that it could actually guide 120 million spaceships from this phone. That's amazing. Like, this is in our pocket. Like, I love how our teachers told us when we were younger, you're never gonna have a calculator in your pocket, right? Well, you do. Like, it does everything for you if you want it to. But what's the one thing that can make this absolutely pointless? Absolutely useless? Anybody have a guess? The power, the battery, exactly. If we are not connecting this thing to the wall constantly, it feels like, this is absolutely worthless. And what do I mean by that? I mean, how do we want to draw this in? I think you can probably guess. But the more and more that we use what we're supposed to be doing, if we do all these things, we look to God, we seek His guidance, but we're not plugging in, we're not dedicating ourselves to true worship, all those things that we're capable of, all that potential that's here, all the potential that's in here, it's gone. It doesn't matter. We have to plug into God's power. We have to dedicate ourselves to His Word, to joining with each other and singing, encouraging each other, to listen to His Word, to read His Word on our own. Again, the one thing that will make a phone useless, and one thing that will make you and I useless, is if we do not charge up, if we don't get our charge in God's power. I want to read for you this one verse in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3 and 4. His divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life, through our knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and goodness. Through these, He has given us His very great and precious promises, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature, having escaped the corruption in the world caused by evil desires. Did you hear that first part? He has given us everything we need. He's given us the Word. He's given us His Spirit. He's given us each other to encourage. He's given us everything we need to live a godly life. Everything we would ever need is in this room right now. Do you believe that? I do. You guys are very special people to me, and I love you all. And I know that if I'm left by myself, I'm going to default to sin. I'm going to default to dishonesty. I'm going to default to whatever it is for you. I will default to the worst place, the worst version of me. But just like a phone, we have to constantly renew ourselves. We always get these stupid software updates and it always messes up our alarms and messes up all our numbers sometimes. But in the same way for us, we have to constantly be looking at ourselves and see, where do I need to step it up a little bit? Where do I need to allow God to work in me in a different way for now? Through all the things that God gives us, we have the power, we have the accessibility, we have the connectivity to God to live a godly life. And as he mentions in verse 4, all those great and precious promises, the promise of a good life, the promise of a fulfilling life, a life that is important, a life that means something, it happens when we dedicate ourselves to the Lord. That's what worship is. Worship is not about you singing a song correctly. It's not about you coming every single Sunday. Now granted, I want you to come. That's a part of worship, but that is not the only thing there is to worship. Worship is a whole lot more than that. And so just kind of some applications for you to kind of let this set in a little bit more. Again, quick recap. Our devotion is elevated when we put God first. Another way of thinking about that, just a little simple things for you. Face the book, the Bible, before Facebook. Fair? Email before email. Talk with God before talking with others. I mean, it's that simple. That's just something that I've done. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. I mean, you got to figure it out for yourself, but that's what I do. Our primary purpose is to worship God.
And that only happens when we allow God to empower us. And so, another simple thing you can do, get a sticky note and just write down, life is not about me. Some of us need to hear that this morning, but it's not. Life's not about me. When you do that, every time you see it, I want you to ask yourself, or ask God actually, how do you want to use me today? Ask the Lord, how do you want to use me today? Worship doesn't have to look the same for everybody. Worship is not a time for us to fit into a cookie cutter of style and preferences. Worship is a gift that we get to participate in. And so, one last thing I want to leave with you, as we've kind of seen this royal waste of time. Royal is how you want to think about God. God is the one we are to be devoted to. Another way of saying that is worship is for God, it's not for us. He's the king, he's the Lord, he's the worship leader, he's the high priest. Worship is not supposed to be self-centered. It's not about me. It's not about what I can get out of worship. Worship is not for us. So don't walk in asking, what can I get out of this? That's not what it's about. This is about being a blessing to the Lord, allowing him to use us as his instruments. So the second one, waste. God calls us to embrace his purposes. So what that means is we give of ourselves. We put the needs of those outside the church over our preferences. We expose ourselves to the Holy Spirit to have his way in our hearts. So there's not going to be a quantifiable gain. Our world screams at us, you have to get more, accumulate more. But God is constantly calling us to say, give. Give of yourself. So there's not going to be a quantifiable gain. It's not an advantageous thing for you to come to worship and worship God every single day of your life. That's what we're called to do. And the third part is time. And I see that really more as God filling us up and we pour ourselves out. So again, that includes resources like money, that includes energy, includes our possessions. What we have, we can use it for God's good. But especially time. Time is a huge one. You will never give anybody anything, no amount as big as your time. To listen, to encourage, to see people for who they are and tell them, that you love them, to give them an encouragement. That's what it means to give of time. And so when we build a relationship, we spend time together with that one person, right? It has to work the same way with God. We have to give of ourselves. We have to give time. We have to dedicate ourselves to spending time with him. And just a kind of encouraging thought for you, it kind of hit me the other day. We come to Southern Wesleyan to hear a professor talk about Sabbath. And in his spiel about Sabbath, he was talking about how worship, especially worship services, are a very unique time. Because I want you to think about your week. Think about how often you sang out loud with others. I mean, if you're me, it was none other time. Like, this is the only time I sang out loud with other people. Or think about how many times you read the word with other people, right? Or how many times you actually had a serious conversation. I mean, I had some serious conversations outside of today, but where is there another time in your week where you're actually going to connect with other people and talk about things that are really important and not just what you had for lunch yesterday? Or how about the weather, right? And so again, worship is a unique opportunity for us to come together and see God for who he is, to experience him, allow him to pour into our lives. Worship is about us emptying ourselves, devoting ourselves, and submitting to him and his purposes for our lives. And so I want to do something a little bit different to kind of close out. I'm not a singer, you guys know that, but I'm going to grace you a little bit. Some of you guys may be a little bit more familiar with the song, but if you ever heard As the Deer, I was thinking back on my time when I was a little bit younger, and the worship leader we had at my dad's church all through my teenage years would always sing this song just whenever he was walking. And it always puzzled me. I was always confused by it, but it's such a good song. I was reflecting back on the words, and it's just powerful. And so you're going to have to join with me in singing if you know it. If not, that's okay. Just listen to the words, allow them to speak to you. And so we're going to try a cappella. This is a little bit risky, all right? So give me some grace. But it's, as the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longeth after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you Lord, you are so good. Lord, I thank you for your word, the encouragement that it brings. God, I thank you for these people. When we're broken, we're people that struggle, and you love us anyway. And so, Lord, I thank you for your presence this morning. I thank you for just the time to worship and to hear from you, and to hear from your word. Lord, thank you for every single one of the people in here, all the stories that we have, all the testimonies we will be able to share with people this week. Lord, fill us now, even now in these moments as we close, that we would look more and more like you. God, we don't want to be people that are characterized by just holding on to worship for us. We want to share it with you. We want to share it with other people. So God, just fill our hearts now, Lord, as we go. Help us to love people well, to listen well, to sit in silence well sometimes, to seek you in your face, in your word. Lord, we just want to be more devoted to you. So God, I thank you again for this time. Be with us now as we go. We love you, and we ask this all in your precious and powerful and holy name. Amen. I want to thank you all for being here this morning. Go be the church this week.